What is the scariest story you know that is 1000 true? Story 1. Luis Garavito. He is by far the worst serial killer pedophile I have ever heard of. He was active in Colombia in the 90s, and he would lure homeless young boys into the jungle where he would offer them things like food, money, or jobs, and he would make the walk for many miles so they'd be too tired to fight back or escape. Afterwards, he would savagely violation and torture the boys. I don't even want to get into detail about what he did, trust me. It's worse than what you think. He was even convicted of 189 takedown. 189. But it's believed he may have taken down as many as 300 to 400 boys. There has even been mass graves found containing his victims' remains with dozens of them. Luis' crimes were so prolific and brutal, the police even thought it was the work of a cartel, a militant group, since this was during Colombia's civil war, or even a satanic cult because they couldn't fathom one man could eliminate that many or been that brutal. What's even more shocking is Luis only sentenced to about 20 years in prison because Colombia doesn't have life imprisonment or the passing sentence. But just before he got parole, he died from cancer. Luis was so prolific that wherever he lived, local, reports of child molestation increased substantially. Story 2. Probably the Paria diving incident, where 5 divers were sucked into an underground oil pipeline while working on repairs. Story 3. The lake that eliminated an entire village when it basically burped, the Lake Nyos disaster. A crater lake in Cameroon caused the deaths of around 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock in 1986 due to a limnic eruption. The lake suddenly released a large cloud of carbon dioxide, suffocating nearby villages and livestock. Story 4. A local story that haunts me is the takedown of a former co-worker, Sean Dugas. He had a Magic the Gathering card collection worth 6 figures, including a Black Lotus IIRC that was incredibly rare at the time. He befriended these 2 brothers who eventually chased him around his house and bludgeoned him to passing with a hammer before stuffing his body into a plastic bin and filling it with concrete. It's so disturbing to me because Sean was such a chill hippie dude who got a talking to for wearing JNCOs to interviews. He was a gifted reporter and had a hand in starting a homeless encampment that served hundreds for years after his passing. He was a wacky and kind dude, and the thought of the terror he went through in his final moments frightens me more than any horror movie I've ever seen. Story 5. One day, I was at my temp job when an announcement came over the PA system that everybody was to stay in their office, lock the door, and not come out under any circumstances until they were told to. Having absolutely no idea what was going on, I locked the door of my office, jammed a chair under the doorknob, sat on the floor in the knee hole of my desk, and read the book I brought to read at lunch. About an hour later, they gave the all clear, and I went back to whatever task I'd been doing beforehand. We later found out that a disgruntled former employee had showed up with a Thompson submachine gun and started shooting people. Story 6. Just recently, hundreds of women were violated and burned alive during the chaos as a Rwandan-backed rebel, M23, took control of Congolese city of Goma. The female inmates were attacked in their wing inside Goma's Munzenza prison. Several thousand men stormed the female wing, violation, decapitated, and then set the female prison on fire with hundreds of women still alive inside. Mind you, there were babies and children in there with their moms. Some sources say there only were 9 to 13 survivors of the female prison. Other sources say there were no survivors of the massacre. We speak of the terrors of Rwanda, but it is happening under our noses again, this time in the DRC. There are so many other atrocities happening there right now, This is just one example. To make it even worse, practically no one is talking about it, other than the obligatory news article that gets swallowed amidst hundreds of other articles about the Kardashians or something else. Story 7. Over the hill from where I was raised. In the 1930s, there was a family with a son who had serious mental problems. It had gotten bad enough they were going to put him in a home. The father took the rest of the family to town while mom stayed with the boy. When the family returned, they found the boy walking around the house with his mom's head on a broomstick. Story 8. This haunts me because I can see how easily it happened. In 1995, in the UK, a man was driving a low loader truck with a mechanical digger on the back. He didn't realize that the arm of the digger wasn't properly secured. As he drove down the twisty roads in Cornwall, the arm would swing out into oncoming traffic. The bucket of the digger ripped the roof from several cars, decapitating the drivers. 5 people died. I don't know if that was 5 separate cars, and I think 2 were injured. The truck driver was completely unaware of the devastation he was leaving in his wake. I think of him. Sometimes. How awful it must be to know you were, unintentionally, responsible for 5 deaths. He ended up in a psychiatric hospital with PTSD, and many first responders also needed PTSD treatment. Horrifying. Story 9. This happened in a small rural community not far from the capital city of our state. Think under an hour to the city, 15 to 20 minutes from suburbia. Many years ago, a man decided that his wife was cheating on him, so he eliminated her. Then, he proceeded to eliminate his 7 children, along with his sister-in-law and her baby, who were visiting. Was due to be hanged, but the passing penalty was then banned. Wound up spending only 7 years in jail. Upon release, he moved states and changed his name. Then married a woman with 7 children and lived his life happily. They had no idea until after he died. ETA, you can Google the Hope Forest massacre for more details. Answer. Surprised to see a South Aussie story on here. Adelaide is known for having bizarre, horrific takedown and disappearances, but I remember being so shocked when I first read about this one, especially because I went to the same high school as some of the victims. Years later, of course, but it's hard to stomach someone could receive so little punishment for a crime like that. Story 10. The DuPont factory and their Teflon story. Literally one company poisoning the entire planet and getting away with it. Sounds so ridiculously fictional, but it absolutely happened, and every living being on the planet still suffers its consequences. Answer. The Radium Girls. That one always fudged me up. I read the book about it and was literally crying by the end. This company knew it was eliminate to them and lied to them the entire time, telling them it was not only safe, but healthy to do. This girl pulled out her lower jaw easily with her bare fingers, and the jaw of the dead girl was so radioactive it helped them win the case literal years after it had been removed. And they were young, 14, 18 young. They were literal girls. Story 11. Most of the scariest ones have been mentioned already, so I'll add one. S21, prison in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge regime. It was in a repurposed high school, existed for 4 years, had around 20,000 prisoners in those 4 years, out of which only 12 are known to have survived. There are records of over 150 people being released, however they were likely recaptured and executed. The building is still there. You can visit it as a museum. Answer. I taught in Asia for years. Schools in multiple countries have a U-shaped building with a courtyard facing the road they're on. I visited S21, and that little detail escaped me until I was there. Seeing a school for children turned into a torture prison hit me deep down. And the photos. They thoroughly documented everyone who they brought there, and now there's one room filled with the photos of those poor people whose crime was being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. Story 12. On 911, people trapped in the upper floors who decided to jump because the alternative was even worse. Answer. I read an account from a first responder firefighter once. He was riding in the back of a fire truck. It was an extremely bumpy ride. The head driver said over the intercom, "We are driving over some debris. Exit the truck on your left. Don't look behind you." Of course, he looked behind himself and saw the debris they were driving over was the bodies of jumpers. Story 13. That pedophiles are shockingly common. Many go their whole lives without being caught or until they are well into old age. Answer. One of the highlights of my life is that I helped put one away. My brother told me about a sleepover he had with some baseball teammates at one of their uncle's house when he was around 14, and the sick fudge gave them adult beverage and tried doing intimacy stuff. Police arrested him the next morning. Apparently the guy had been abusing the nephew for years and years. Only ended up getting 6 years in prison though. But to your point, the guy hid in plain sight for years. My parents said at his trial he had a group of friends and family there cheering him on basically and thinking all of the kids, including his nephew, were lying. Story 14. The Seawolf Ferry Tragedy. 304 deaths, mostly children. Captain told the passengers to stay put while it was sinking. He was one of the first to be rescued. One of the teachers spent their last dying breath pushing kids out of the ship while fully underwater. Didn't have a life jacket, gave them all to the kids. Imagine being so brave that you're trapped on the 3rd floor of a sinking ferry with a room full of children and you are propelling them out of the window by your feet one by one. You could stop at your last possible breath and swim out yourself, but you would rather save every kid. You possibly can. A real fucking hero. Story 15. Fatima Quintana. On February 5, 2015, Eftima, a 12-year-old girl, was intercepted by 3 neighbors. They attempted to violation her, and Fatima fought with all her might to defend herself and reach her home, which was just a few meters away. These 3 men, angered by the girl's anger, stabbed her more than 90 times, violationed her, and tortured her. Even after this, Fatima was still alive in total agony. Upon realizing this, her 3 neighbors smashed her skull by throwing rocks at her. In October 2021, the 3 perpetrators were convicted. Jos Juan Hernandez Tecrucheo received life imprisonment. Luis Angel Ataide Reyes was sentenced to 73 years and 8 months in prison. Misael Ataide Reyes, a minor at the time of the crime, he was initially released due to lack of evidence, but was later rearrested and sentenced to 5 years. He is currently free. Unfortunately, Fatima's family has had to travel across Mexico, fleeing retaliation from the families of these individuals, who are also involved in organized crime. Jos Juan and Luis Niel's sentences could still be reduced to parole. Fatima's family is still fighting to ensure that the government upholds its promise of justice, and that these 2 scumbags are not released. Story 16. The takedown of James Bulger and the fact that one of the killers is now married with kids. Absolute headfuck. Edit. He wasn't married. That was me misremembering. He, Venables, the one who's been in and out of jail for possession of child intimacy abuse material since his release, was found to be in a relationship with a woman who had a young kid. Thanks to the new identities, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that either or both of them could have gone on to have their own kids. Answer. I am old enough to remember that story being all over the news. It was incredibly shocking. I only later found out that we were only hearing the outline of what those boys did. I guess the news media at that time avoided being too graphic. Truly horrific. I remember having discussions about what a society should do with children that are so damaged as to be capable of such things. Story 17. The Bhopal Union Carbide disaster, the worst industrial accident in the world. Thousands of people died in agony with absolutely no warning. Answer: Hey, I'm from Bhopal. My dad was 5 during this tragedy. My entire paternal family suffered through that night, and I don't know if it's the effect of the gas, but after that night, every single child on my dad's side, including me and my siblings, have some or the other eye defect. Every single one of us got diagnosed with issues like astigmatism amblyopia before we hit the age of 4. And everyone on my dad's side before my generation had literal perfect eyes, 20/20 vision. We still have grandparents that don't require glasses. Lol. And although it annoys me, I can't help but feel grateful that this is the only side effect, unconfirmed, my dad and all his Bhopali family got. We still see people on the street with serious deformations and disabilities that were caused due to them. Their parents suffering through the gas tragedy. Very heartbreaking. I can't even imagine all the horrors the elders of the family have seen, heard, and must remember vividly. My grandma tells me how she was hearing from people daring to go out the next day that streets were littered by dead bodies of those who were trying to escape. Story 18. Went camping in a nice little rustic cabin on a lake. 1 room, fireplace, bunk beds on one side, door opposite side. First day, everything seemed fine. Next morning, we woke up to over 100 snakes on the concrete floor. Seems they liked the heat from our small cooking fire and came in overnight. Several species, some venomous, but not all. I don't have a snake phobia, but certainly a healthy fear of a painful venomous bite far from hospitals. We had to be very careful and take our time to get out. Left half our stuff we didn't need. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Story 19. The Aberfan disaster. Scary as in it must have been terrifying for the children, teachers, and parents, but also because the NCB blatantly ignored the warnings in the months leading up to the event. It's very scary that these companies value human life so little in the name of profit. For those that don't know, Aberfan is a mining village in South Wales. On the mountains that surrounded the valley, they tipped coal spoil products. These towered over the villages of the valleys. For months leading up to the incident, the firemen of the coal tips warned that the tips were shifting and they heard noises of it moving. Leading up in the last few weeks, there was heavy rainfall. This mixed with the natural streams of the mountain and started eroding the tips from within. On the day, around 9 a.m., just as the kids were preparing to go to school assembly, the tip avalanched and came crashing down directly on the school. 116 children died, drowning in coal slurry. There was absolutely no warning to the village. The area lost a generation of children, and it took the NCB decades to even admit any fault. Answer: reminds me of the Vajont Dam disaster in Italy. I found out about it while driving through the valley and thinking, wow, that dam so high above the valley towns looks weirdly ominous. And later, oh, I don't really understand Italian, but I think maybe these signs over there mention some kind of disaster. Anyway, another story of many warnings going ignored. Story 20. The kidnapping, torture, and takedown of Junko Furuta. Edit. To all those saying I should have put a warning, you're in a thread asking about the scariest thing that's 1000 true, and it's clearly labeled as a takedown. What do you expect? Sunshine and rainbows? Here's your warning. It's a Japanese teen girl who was kidnapped, then brutally beaten, mercilessly tortured, and repeatedly intimacy assaulted for 44 days until she eventually died from the abuse. Story 21. The Rwandan Genocide. Just a whole lot of machetes and violation. Like millions of both machetes and violation. Ooh. Answer. I will forever be grateful to my 8th grade history teacher who has us read a first-hand account of the Rwandan genocide from a woman. Genuinely the most fudge-terrifying book I've ever read. And am not even exaggerating when I say I'm borderline obsessed with scary things and what goes bump in the night. I remember she was in college when it happened. At one point was stacked in small bathroom with dozens of other women listening to the sounds of passing and screaming outside, and hid in a pastor's hidden room during the chaos. It changed my worldview and made little jerk teen me want to do better. If anyone can remember her name or the book, please tell me. Story 22. The San Isidro mass shooting. It really was among the first really big senseless mass shootings in America. You're just going to McDonald's to get a quick lunch, and then you're dead. Story 23. The untouched power narcos have in Mexico. You could just find yourself at the wrong place at the wrong time, and you're forcefully disappeared, and God bless your poor soul. Now, of course, I know wrong place, wrong time isn't exclusive to Mexico, but it's just far more common. You either get recruited, mistaken for somebody, you happen to see something you weren't supposed to, or just subject to somebody's sadism, and you'll suffer a terrible fate. Not just you, your family will have to turn to body-searching groups, because police are not only incompetent, but actually complicit and good. Luck finding a bone that matches within the next few years. It's fudge terrifying. Genuinely. Answer. My husband's best friend is from Mexico, but had lived in America for over 20 years. He was deported 2 years ago and was living in Mexico City. Less than a year after being back in Mexico, he went missing. He's still missing, and we have heard nothing, and the police are no help. He has 4 children in America, and my husband, being from Mexico himself, truly believes he ran into the wrong people or even the cartel. My husband is too scared of that possibility to ever even take our daughter, 16 there, to meet her family. And I went to high school with a girl who was with her family driving through Mexico to visit relatives. They got carjacking by the cartel and everyone, but her was takedown on the spot, her siblings and both parents. She was shot but survived. I know it's my daughter's heritage, and most of her family is in Mexico, but I'll never let her go there, nor does she want to because we've talked to her about the dangers. Story 24. Very random, but I always thought the Bodom Lake takedown were scary as hell. The fact that the murderer might have actually shown up at the kids' funerals, and by the time the police knew they couldn't find him. The overall brutality of it, being a kid completely isolated in the wilderness with a few of your friends and having a Friday the 13th-like scenario play out. Scary as hell. Lots of scarier stories for sure, but the details of this one always gave me goosebumps if you read up on it. Story 25. Toxic humidifier disinfectant case in South Korea, which affected more than 5,000 victims. When humidifiers were still new, families with children rushed to get their hands on this new product, which in turn did nothing to help the victims and only introduced them to hell on earth. 1,814 victims dead and more than 7,000 injured. Answer. Just a little elaboration from my understanding of the case. What was deadly about this was not the humidifier itself, but the chemical that were promoted to use alongside the machines. Some of the main companies, household brands, that were selling them were pesticides company using the same recipes. The humidifiers were advertised to cleanse the air and to keep it on as much as possible. Children especially fell ill very fast. Within the next couple of years, there were a sharp increase in cases, and things finally started unraveling. There is a movie on it as well. Very informative. Story 26. Michigan, 2019 on Christmas Eve, a man named Kevin Bacon met a man on Grindr and went to his house. The man stabbed and ate Kevin. Apparently, it was the first time he tried to do that, but the other victim, about 2 months earlier, escaped. Story 27. Not a story for faint-hearted ones. When I was a soldier several years ago, my job was to recover and extract people of my country from dangerous places or people with precious information for us. A foreign woman was in touch with our intel service, and we had to reach her in exchange for some information to hunt down a terrorist. Then she could get the French nationality and end up in a safe place for the rest of her life. We found her dead. She was spotted somehow, and those animals eliminate her by filling her female body part with molten metal. Almost a decade later, I am still having nightmares about that, about the smell, and I am still wondering what kind of inhumanity you need to have to do that to someone else. This day, more than any else, I learned that some people are looking human, but they are not. Story 28. Unit 731 is up there, the worst of humanity emo, just pure evil, and not enough people know about it. Story 29. The serial killer, Israel Keys. He would bury eliminate kits all around the US so he could go back at any time and there wouldn't be a trace of him buying sketchy shoot. And he didn't have an MO. He eliminate teens to the elderly, men and women, didn't matter. The story of how he got caught is fudge wild too. Story 30. I lived in Japan for a couple years, and I learned pretty quickly the best way to eliminate yourself by train, putting your head on a railing when the train doesn't have time to brake, was common knowledge. There's really only one logical explanation for why it was common knowledge, and it still breaks my heart. A personal addition. Trains were close to always on time there. All the times I took the train, if it was even 5 minutes late, it was always due to a tragic end. Sometimes there would still be bits of human debris on it. First few times it happened, it made me want to cry. And I was horrified by how blasé everyone else seemed. By my 5th or 6th time, I was mostly just thinking, I hope this doesn't make me too late. The value of a human life was being entirely measured by how much it inconvenienced me. I knew most of the people on the platform were quietly doing the same thing, and that was one of the scariest experiences I've ever had. Story 31. The 2022 Caribbean diving disaster. Absolute nightmare fuel. The fact that the employer did nothing and those men were just left there to die. They admitted they had no rescue plan, citing that they had no legal responsibility to rescue the men. Also, if you value your sleep and sanity, do not read about Unit 731. Story 32. The story of the Watcher House legit kept me up at night. Imagine buying your dream home and then getting creepy letters from someone saying they've been watching the house for generations. And the stuff they wrote was so specific and eerie, like they knew what rooms you were in. Answer: it's a fascinating story. And the eerie part is that to this day, nobody knows who the Watcher was. It's even possible that the original person stopped sending letters and then someone else, or maybe several others in the neighborhood, took over. A truly creepy detail is that the dad in the Broaddus family, who owned the house, admitted that he himself wrote some anonymous letters years after the entire thing started. The people who moved into the house when the Broadduses finally sold it in 2019 never got another letter. So, was it possible that Derek Broaddus himself actually wrote all of the Watcher letters? And if